Hi, everyone. Welcome to my episode of Let's Be Social. I have a very special guest on today. His name is David Gilks, and he is a personal friend of mine. And just wanted to welcome you to my little show here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, you're very welcome. No, well, and I was excited to see that you actually had launched a podcast. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, actually. I just enjoy it. It's just a passion project, a little sideline that I like to do. Um, so I just kind of wanted to ask you, you have such an interesting background and you're doing so many interesting things. I thought you could just introduce yourself and, go from there, how you got started into, you know,
Yeah, yeah, it's
what to talk about.
well, it's always interesting, right? Because people you often hear this quote that people see the glory but never hear the story, right? And they always think, well, that's easy for you, right? That's easy for you to do. But I think to keep it really simple, it just there was a very chaotic road up until I was 28, and I spent 15 years. I started leaving home when I was 8. Um, and I finally made a break, I think around 13, 14 for 2 years. Spent a couple of years on the streets and ended in a jail. And I got thrown in prison for a short stint. The judge thought I could, I could do with the lesson of what absolute loss of freedom looked like. So, yeah, and that was pretty effective because who wants to live there? And, but it was just a bunch of just ill-advised steps and stupid things as I bounced around the planet. I ended up in the south of Portugal, which is actually kind of a great turning point, and I'm pretty sure it saved my life because I was living in a ski resort prior to that, and this was back in the '80s, and cocaine was cool, right? People grew little extended fingernails just so they could scoop it, and it didn't, it wasn't like you see it today, right? The stigma that's around it. Not that it was ever good. It was never a good idea, just so we were clear,
Yeah.
but it was kind of cool back then. And I was just starting to get a real taste for it, and had the chance to move to the south of Portugal. So, somebody was like somebody was looking out for me, and I ended up in this old country. And what was so interesting is that it took me about 6 months just to slow down
Mhm.
because North American lifestyle, fishing village in the south of Portugal, not the same thing at all, right? And I had to obviously slow down because they weren't going to change for me. So, and I found this really interesting rhythm. And the more I began to understand the culture, and I just found this really beautiful continuity and rhythm and synchronicity to the lives. And no matter where I went inside the country, there were Portuguese people doing Portuguese thing, right? And there was again, there was this the culture was bound together by a bunch of old rules. And I see, in our North American culture, we're out of our mind because we've unbound all the rules, and now you can do whatever you want. And you can't do whatever you want, actually. It just doesn't work that way, right? There is rules that bind things together to make things work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was a real quite I guess a spiritual lesson, I guess you could call it. Just an awakening to, you know, if I wanted to actually have a life other than the chaotic life I've been kind of playing around with, um, I had to slow down, I had to pay attention. And again, getting into the rhythm, it led me up to a point where about 3.5 years there, I'm sitting on the beach. I had this, it's very strange, right? You only see this stuff in movies. But this kind of voice in the back of my head saying, because your life was so about you and what you wanted, and I was charismatic, so I could get in and out of trouble quite easily, and never pay a heavy price, because I could talk my way out of it. So
Mhm.
I used people for whatever I could get, and then I moved on essentially. And so the voice said, well, because it's all about you. When you disappear, and you will, because we're all mortal, nobody will care and nobody will know. Like your life didn't make a difference to anyone except for you. Um, and I don't know if it was a line out of a movie that all of a sudden my brain remembered, or when somebody once said that somebody was praying for you, because that idea punched me in the face. And then several months later, I moved back to Canada at the age of 28. Great in education, criminal record, no money. Moved back with my parents, humbling, and I began an internship in natural healthcare. And I began a very interesting road the last almost 30 years now, the last, 28 years, 29 years. And it was just a 180. And then because I decided, well, let's see what happens if I go the other way. And just, challenge after opportunity after challenge after opportunity just kept dropping in front of me, moment after moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's it's one of those, it's, what they call it, coming to Jesus moment, right? One of those moments where you have to really decide because you don't have all the time in the world because we are finite, like we are mortal,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and I realized when I got the drugs out of my system, which was a process. My father is a genius in the world of natural health care, and I detoxed every day that I was there. He'd create these new herbal combinations. He'll wildcraft it, right? So he built it all from scratch.
Mhm.
Um, and I would be nauseous, and I had these extraordinary, awful headaches because he was just purging 15 years of abuse out of my body within I bet it took, I bet the first 8 months was just me just feeling like hell. Um, and it wasn't detox in the normal sense of the word. It was like every cell of my body was purging. It wasn't just trying to get out of your brain or trying to get stuff out of your liver. I had 100 trillion cells cleaning house. And it was pretty rough. But what was so interesting on the other side of it is that once I became healthy, I realized that, I've got a really interesting mind and I can wrestle with really complicated things. And I like to wrestle with really complicated ideas. And I will spend years wrestling with complicated ideas where a lot of people get bored within 10 minutes. If it's not interesting, they can't figure it out. They just want to go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, and then it took me down all sorts of paths. So I did my internship for 3.5 years, natural healthcare, and became a chartered herbalist and became a accredited what they call a biokinesiologist. Just a form of natural healthcare testing and assessment. Then I ended up in the fitness world because, well, if you spend time on the street, you realize that being small and vulnerable, not always the best policy.
Mhm.
So part of this thing, he said, well, maybe if you're larger than most people, then maybe that would work. And you would have to be intimidated or feel afraid or insecure.
Yeah.
So, so I got into bodybuilding and I got into training. And then, yeah, it was so fascinating. Just things just kept dropping in front of me. And I just, it's like the rungs of a ladder. And I've been climbing and the next one just gets thrown up there. And I go, all right, well, just keep going and have no idea where the hell this is all heading.
Yeah.
And, um, most people have a life plan, and I'm just blindly going forward. Just it's like Pac-Man eating up those dots. The dots just keep appearing. I'm just eating them up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I end up from coming back to Canada, kind of like a landed immigrant because I've been gone for so long. And now I'm some of my best friends are professors at Berkeley University. I'm studying neuroscience. I'm fascinated by the neuroscience of memory and injury. I'm studying the neuroscience of spirituality.
Mhm.
It just it's really hard to believe considering just how far away that was from, hey, can I borrow a cigarette and do you have any cocaine for sale? It's such a
Dark
such a
color.
different, just such a different it's the contrast is so stark, and sometimes we always believe the negative things about ourselves, and sometimes it's easier to believe that I was that thing years ago than I'm this thing now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's so what's been interesting, I guess, and I'll kind of tie this thing to kind of tie it together, and then if you have any questions, you can ask. You can kind of jump in
Yeah.
because I'll just talk nonstop. It's that one of the things one of the things I understood and learned, maybe about 10 years ago, is that our brain is a pattern recognizing unit. It's a machine. That's what it does. Well, not quite a machine, but you get the idea. It hunts for patterns. And the reason why it hunts for patterns because the cost of doing something that requires a lot of thought is very expensive. If you try to learn a new task, it's just mentally exhausting, right? Your brain's using up all this fuel, and your brain will use up 20% of all the energy your body takes in. So it's very demanding. So the brain wants to figure it out and then take the conscious struggle and drop it into your subconscious and turn it into a pattern. So it's automatic, right? And so, it's probably 75% cheaper to have a pattern than it is to have a wrestling thought. And so, and again, I thought that was kind of fascinating. So the brain likes to find patterns. So anything that wasn't working in my life, I realized, okay, there's a subconscious pattern. Let's go dive in and look for it and find where the patterns come from and how did the brain put them together and why are these things all associated, if that's what the brain's doing, right? So it kind of simplified the journey rather than saying, why am I such an idiot? Why can't I lose weight? Why can't I save money? Why relationships always suck? Instead of asking questions that are kind of vague and ambiguous, you're going, but underneath all these things that aren't working is a series of patterns that are working. The patterns are working, you just don't like the outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's so it's not like it's not a conscious fault, it's a subconscious pattern. And so if you understand that, then then there's something that you need to explore, and then we can rewrite those patterns of behavior. But it's not so much about good or bad, right or wrong, either way we perceive it, because we're not trying to fix something that's wrong about us.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to alter a pattern that the brain has created over time, unbeknownst to us.
Yeah.
And that's really, and that it takes the moral judgments out of the whole process. If you want to get better, there's a pattern that you need to ameliorate, a pattern you need to change. So you have to make the unconscious conscious, clean it up, redefine it, and then drop it back down, and you're good to go for the most part.
I think people don't know how to do that. Most people.
Yeah. Well, it's so I have a theory. I used to call it opinions, but it sounds better if you say it's a theory, because otherwise I'm just opinionated. But and I am, I think, but the theory sounds better, right? I can claim academic freedom here. So here's a theory, and I discovered this when I was I had a Perk MedFit center, which was Perk MedFit was a prescribed exercise and rehabilitation center, and so it was like a body shop for people, right? Orthopedic surgeons would send me their new hip clients or their new knee clients, or somebody's had a laminectomy, they've had disc removed, or whatever the case may be. And my job was to rebuild them, not just to make them functional, but just to get them, so they're stronger. They go back, post surgery, they go back to their life, not just being able to walk, but actually quite a bit stronger. Mm-hmm. And so what was fascinating, and we don't have time to lead up to look at the backstory of how it led up to this kind of discovery. But I realized that over time that if I spent 80% of my efforts working on somebody's core strength and posture and alignment, right? So core strength, posture, alignment, that became the primary focus of work with a client. The injury was the second part of the conversation, but the injury wasn't the focus. It was core strength, posture, and alignment. And if I spent 80% of my time there, the problem almost always remedied itself by a large margin. So if somebody had weakness in their knee because of an ACL tear, right? They tore the ligaments, and of course there's fear and apprehension, there's guarded, there's weakness, all this neurological behavior to the knee around pain and trauma. That I realized that working on the strength of the knee was only a part of it. I actually had to change the pattern in the brain that had apprehension, pain, weakness, avoidance patterns built in here now. I had to change this, not just the knee. And so, once I kind of came to understanding, realizing that, the pattern, our physical patterns are stored in a collective series of memories called our procedural memory. And procedural memory is just how to, right? Procedures, right? How did I start the computer, right? There's a process of clicking buttons. And so the how to part of life, is we have maps for it. And if the map is injured, so the map that was really bloody painful. That was freaking horrific. That step, turn, ligament tear, scream, fall, right? Mm-hmm. You got 8 months of limping around by the time you get into surgery. And so you got 8 months of pain, fear, apprehension, weakness, avoidance. Mm-hmm. Pattern.
Yeah.
Right. And a very acute pattern, because you have pain or trauma or negativity associated to it. And then you're trying to rebuild the strength of the knee, but the pain pattern is still there. So you're building the strength typically on top of a pain pattern, which means that it doesn't work, because not only do you have the pain pattern, right? From the trauma to the knee, you have 8 months of avoidance and fear of a daily pattern attached to it. So now it's just this big mess of movement, and it's more in your brain's perception. So that's why I said, if when we start focusing on core strength, we didn't focus on the problem was a symptom, but the problem isn't the problem. The problem is that I've got all these other patterns I want to clean up, right? So if you damage your knee, you'll shift the weight to the other side. So all of a sudden you're wrecking the other knee. And I'm sure in nursing, like somebody goes in to get one hip replaced, it's only a matter of like a year before the next one has to be replaced.
Yeah.
Damage one knee, all the weight shifts over. Now you're destroying the other knee.
Yeah.
So being aware of that, I really knew that there was one problem here at the knee, but there's a whole body attached to the knee. So let's look at the whole thing. And what I believed, I can't say I know this for sure, but I've seen ample evidence that when we were doing our work with the posture and alignment, we were building a brand new foundational map, or a brand new way of that knee looking at movement. And what it didn't have attached to it was pain, fear, avoidance, apprehension. It was a brand new map that was completely clear of that. And when it came time to put weight on that knee to really start building it aggressively, the map was pure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, and in fact, what I've come to believe, right? And I'll say theorize, but I can't say I know this for absolute 100% certainty. But what I've seen ample evidence of is that if you look at the world of exercise, whether it's from rehabilitation or just physical fitness or training as a high-level athlete, if you see every movement that you do as a core exercise, the brain will start consolidating or start pulling patterns in together that would normally exist. Right. So if everything's a core exercise and you see it that way and you think about it that way, and you really kind of bring that idea forward, and you're trying to say, well, how does this? I'm going for a run. How's run a core exercise? And then you spend a little bit of time trying to organize. Okay, what would that look like? What's that feel like? And how does that actually work? And once you clarify the reason why that did be so, then all of a sudden running takes a whole different. You run differently, and the risk of injury is less. Again, so you take that from athletics to just general fitness. And when the brain begins to see that pattern of thought, you become stronger, more agile, better balance, better flexibility. And, just by thinking congruently and giving the brain, a single road to follow. Right. So that kind of took me into another place where I started looking at spiritual development and personal development. And spiritual development is different than personal development. It's quite a bit different.
Yeah.
Personal development it's just like exercise, right? All these fragmented ideas, right? So you got the yoga, the yoga aficionado. Everybody loves yoga, and all your muscle heads, terrible for you. You got to do yoga. And all the people that run saying, yoga is just, it's just for the granolas. Running is where it's at. Running has all these great benefits. And the power lifters are just scoffing at everyone, because if you can't lift 800 pounds, then why are you here? Right. So we have all these camps of everybody thinking about their activity in this very isolated, fragmented way of being. Right. So they're not seeing that, I did my teacher's training in yoga. I was involved in martial arts for years. I was a competitive natural bodybuilder at a national level. I practice Qigong. I run, I sprint. I love doing mobility work. I love track and field work. I like lifting heavy weights, and I like being a bodybuilder. It's one body. You can do all sorts of different things with it if you think from a core premise. Right. So personal development, spiritual development are kind of that same issue. When you look at personal development, it's a fragmented series of ideas that are not bound together.
Yeah.
Even though they all there's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's a fragmented idea. Tony Robbins is not going to come in and bury my parents. Right. There's no flow to that. Right. He's a fragment of an idea. And listen, this guy's done some amazing work. So I'm not criticizing him. I'm just saying, if I look at the history of spiritual cultures, every single day, multiple times a day, people were interacting with their spiritual belief systems on multiple levels, from how they interact with food, how they interact with each other, with let's say, as far as intimate partners, how they interact with their children, how they interact with nature, their neighbors, how they interact with politics. It's just change of seasons. Like through our spiritual lens of culture over time was this really pervasive pattern of belief and thinking and doing things. But it just, if I was a Jew, then everything was looked at the world through my Jewish faith, right? It's looking at the looking at the Old Testament. That was my my guidebook of choice. Look at the Old Testament, and through that lens, we all share the same values. It's the same thing. Christianity, operates a little bit more off the New Testament, but it was this congruent way of looking at the world, and it was based off a central theme that really affected everything. And yes, I mean, some ideas have to be upgraded. It is the 21st century, and what happened 2,000 years ago is maybe not quite as applicable.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think what you'll see though is consistently is that there's a book I'm writing called From Knowing Better to Doing Better, and it's the one thing that changes everything. The one thing is, if I'm physically training, I have my physical core strength, and that becomes 80% of my focus. Everything else is secondary. When it comes to who I am as a human being, 80% of my work is on my character, which is like my core strength. And if 80% of the work is on my character, and that becomes the focus, my problems become smaller as my character becomes larger. And so a lot of these things we run around and try to deal with. We try to find the right personal development book to solve that problem. And the 3 sacred principles and the 5 steps to wealth and the 13 steps to intimacy and like all these fragmented ideas. And it's not like they're wrong. They're just not bound together. And because they're not bound together, the brain doesn't know what to do with them. So they don't fuse together as this really powerful, united thought process and philosophy that makes life simple. Right. And I think that's what we've done very poorly, is that we've in our let's say our disgust of some of the things that have happened in the name of religion over the centuries, because we've kind of wrinkled our nose at some of the more horrific things, and there has been for sure. We've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And you can't have thousands of years of civilization built upon spiritual practices which permeated every waking moment of their life and simply decide that all of it has to go.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's no orientating reflex.
Yeah.
We don't know how to talk to each other. We don't trust each other. We don't trust ourselves. What do you believe? What level should you believe? And what about all these different parts of your life? How are they connected? Right? And I really find that it just, when you're born, you have 2 primary cores. You have a physical core that gets you up and running as a baby, right? Like babies don't have to learn how to walk. It just happens. So that's innate software or hardware. And so your ability to learn how to move is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmental, which means once you're able to learn how to walk and you can move around, then the environment challenges you all sorts of different ways. Let's say you lived on a farm, that would make you stronger and more agile, and it would challenge you through the course of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lisa Miller, she's a PhD from Columbia University, and wrote a book called The Awakened Brain. And this lady is extraordinary to listen to. I absolutely love this woman. And she also pointed out that spirituality, it's proven, spirituality is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmental. Interesting. So we seem to be adequate. We seem to be built with this ability to get started, but then the world has to carry it forward. And so you see a lot of our older cultures, for example, that we have coming of age ceremonies for young boys and girls when the oxytocin levels in the body begin to decrease, which is the binding hormone for children to their parents. That begins to decrease as, let's say, for young boys, testosterone levels increase, and they're going through this process of individuation. They're becoming their own person. And then our culture was so clever. They understood that it was necessary to bind, to create a pattern or create a system or a framework for these young people as they're breaking away from their parents, to give this framework to follow that gives them a set of rules saying, yes, you can be your own person. However, you still live in a family, you still live in a community, and you still live in a country, you live in a society, and there's rules to the game. So here's how you can have your cake, but this is how it looks. And so it became a guiding light for young people. And now, what's our process? Well, you get a driver's license, mm-hmm. right? Or you're old enough to drink. You've been drinking long before you're legally able to, but and it doesn't have that kind of power, and it doesn't have that kind of that beautiful path that directs people, especially our young people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting, right? This whole journey for all these years has kind of taken me, through a lot of exploration to, wow, everything's so complicated, and then drop back down to, it's actually not that complicated.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to humble yourself to natural and spiritual laws, if you're willing to make an exploration of that, then life becomes quite self-evident. And what needs to be done, it's actually, it's really not that complicated, not that easy, however, right? And, I've always thought that people would never be unhappy, would never be depressed, we'd never be angry or frustrated with ourselves if we didn't know the difference between knowing better and doing better.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is that we know different, we just don't do different, and we don't know why. And the reason, and one of the big reasons I think is the reason why we don't act on our, let's say our knowledge or our moral compass when it shows up, right? When it tells us, when our brain's wagging its finger at us,
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we don't follow through is that just like an athlete, like the average person who goes to the gym has a very fragmented way of looking at fitness, will probably never be a competitive athlete if they look at things very fragmented. They're just playing around with it.
Yeah.
When we look at our let's say our moral compass or our life philosophy, if it's really fragmented, we don't really know what we stand for, but in some places, but not everywhere, and it's really kind of broken up, then we have no foundation to build from. It just doesn't work. And the more I get into this line of thought, and the more I think about it, I realize that it's quite simple. Well, not easy. The idea is simple, but it's work for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You want to develop a great physical capacity, see everything as a core exercise. You want to have a beautiful life. And it's not about making lots of money. It's just, do I feel good in my life? Do I feel good about my life? Then see everything that you do as a part of your character development. And your character, your who you say you are should be present and obviously present in every part of your life. And that's the job, to reconcile what's happening against this character, this sense of character strength that you declared. And then you keep saying, okay, everything's about my character development. Everything's about my character development. Everything I'm going to say, everything I'm going to do. And you'll find that if you just simplify down to those two levels, the rest of it will start to unfold for you naturally. All right. Said that all in one breath.
Well, I find it very complex, all of those things. And I feel like some people might start out on a physical journey, for example, and may end up kind of like yourself, exploring personal development and those other facets to kind of learn about themselves, about their own spirituality. Some people never do. Some people, I feel like, are going through life and they're lost. So, I guess it's what we're willing to take on and explore.
Yeah, well, I think that's why I've been, why I mean, we're connected by social media, so obviously I put out all the time, just tons of information.
Yes.
And yes, there's complexity to it, but there hasn't been a conversation that I've had with anyone as I take them through the I Am Project, process, that rarely does anybody not know what they should be doing. And I think it's that level of honesty. For every part of our life that's not working, there's a truth that's just not being told. And be willing to go explore it. And and it's not fun to realize that you are the cause. You're the cause of so many of these challenges that you've created. Like, it's not a matter of your fault.
Yeah.
But it's your responsibility. Right. I mean, I've been at this for 30 years. So yeah, I think in a very unique way. And I'm quite obsessive when it comes to getting a hold of an idea. But though it's not your fault, it's still your responsibility. And it's exciting. And once you start moving forward, if you're earnestly moving forward, you'll find that there's people like myself, for example, that are willing to just to give you a slap in the back of the head and point you in that direction, and willing to give advice. And as long as you're willing to keep moving forward, mentors and people that will desire to help will be there with you. Right. But if you're one of these individuals that keep asking for help but do nothing with the information you're giving, people will want nothing to do with you, because that's exhausting.
Yeah.
So So it just, I mean, the help's out there, but you have to be honest with yourself and be willing to ask for help and be willing to act on that information. And the more that you show that you're willing, the universe seems to show up and say, okay, here's the next rung, here's the next rung, here's the next rung. I found by 30 years, the last 30 years has been that for me for sure.
It's very good. That's very interesting. I wish we could talk longer. We always we always have these interesting conversations about things, especially the topic of neuroplasticity and stuff. I can't even say it today.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's hey, listen, we live in an extraordinary world. I mean, you are comprised of you're 100 trillion cells that somehow organize themselves intelligently to give you life, to allow you to hear, speak, and live and feel. Inside each of those cells is 100 trillion atoms per cell.
Yeah.
Like we are so complex. And Einstein once said that either you look at life like everything's a miracle or nothing is. And I'm in awe of life at all levels. And that makes life more interesting because you don't miss out on as much. Everything, you'll stop and you'll watch bees play in the lavender for 10 minutes just to watch them going, oh, they're amazing. Honeybees over here, right? Bumblebees over here. What's the difference? I don't know. Let's spend 3 months figuring it out. They get a bumblebee back there, right?
Yeah.
Right.
One of my friends, she posted a daily thing of the caterpillar turning into the monarch butterfly. And it happened yesterday, and she was so excited. She was just like, I just witnessed a miracle,
Yeah.
because it's amazing just to see this transformation. So in a lot of ways, that's how I kind of look at, how I am. I kind of work on myself, and I'm I can't even talk, metamorphosizing into something else,
Yeah.
thing that I wasn't yesterday.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, as far as we know, we have one shot at it, right? There might be a karmic wheel and it might better come back, but for now, we know that we have a finite amount of time. So
Yeah.
why not? Like you're all in. So why not make every day extraordinary? Because you only have so many of them.
And just have fun.
Yeah.
Have fun while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure, as always. I'll probably have you back on again as a guest because, I mean, it's always so interesting, the topics, that come out. And thank you so much and taking the time out of your day and out of the beginning of our long weekend. So
Yes.
we will talk again soon. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.